I bought my daughter a detox tea, thinking it would help her feel better. Her husband looked at the bright green package in my hands and said, "Only pigs drink that." Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. My name is Margaret, and I live in a small apartment in Brooklyn on the third floor of a pre-war building where the radiator clanks all winter and the fire escape overlooks a narrow alley filled with dumpsters. The wallpaper is peeling near the ceiling, a faded floral pattern that was outdated when I moved in 30 years ago. The floorboards creak under my weight, especially near the kitchen where I spend most of my mornings making coffee in the same chipped mug I've used since my husband left. The apartment isn't much, but it's mine. Every scratch on the wooden floor tells a story. The dent near the bathroom door from when Sarah learned to ride her bike indoors on a rainy day. The water stain on the living room ceiling from when the upstairs neighbor's bathtub overflowed 3 years ago. The paint touch-ups I did myself, never quite matching the original color, creating a patchwork of slightly different shades of cream. Some mornings, when the light comes through the east-facing windows just right, I can see dust motes floating in the air, dancing in the golden beams like tiny ghosts of all the years I've lived here. My building is full of sounds that have become like old friends. Mrs. Rodriguez on the second floor who plays salsa music every Saturday morning while she cleans. The couple upstairs whose footsteps I can trace across my ceiling, him heavy and deliberate, her light and quick. The super Jose who's been here almost as long as I have, whistling while he fixes things, always the same 3 songs on rotation. And the pigeons, God, the pigeons that roost on the fire escape, cooing and scratching at dawn until I tap on the window to shoo them away. That Sunday morning when I heard those words, I was wearing my old blue cardigan, the one with the missing button at the bottom. My hands were cold despite the steam rising from my tea. I had picked up that detox tea at the health food store on Atlantic Avenue, spending nearly $20 I couldn't really afford because the woman at the counter said it would help with inflammation and energy. The store smelled like sandalwood and fresh ginger, with rows of glass jars filled with loose herbs and powders. The woman working there, maybe 30 years old with long braided hair and kind eyes, had listened patiently as I explained about my daughter's constant fatigue, her complaints about joint pain. She'd shown me 3 different blends, letting me smell each one, explaining the properties of turmeric and ginger and green tea. I'd chosen the most expensive one because I wanted the best for Sarah. Always the best for Sarah, even when it meant I'd have to skip buying the new winter boots I needed, the ones that didn't let water seep in when it rained. I thought of my daughter Sarah immediately, how tired she always looked, how she complained about her joints aching. I imagined her face lighting up when I gave it to her. Maybe we'd drink it together, talk like we used to when she was younger and still wanted my company. I imagined us sitting at her fancy kitchen island, the one with the marble countertop that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, laughing about something silly, sharing secrets like we used to when she was in high school and would tell me everything about her day. I even practiced what I'd say when I gave it to her. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that morning, holding the tea package, trying out different opening lines. "I found something that might help with your energy levels." Too clinical. "Look what I got for you, sweetheart." Too desperate. I finally settled on something casual, something that wouldn't make it seem like I was trying too hard, like I wasn't hoping this small gift would buy me an invitation to stay for lunch, maybe dinner. But when I arrived at their brownstone in Park Slope that Sunday, carrying the tea in a small gift bag with tissue paper I'd saved from Christmas, everything felt wrong from the moment I walked in. The house itself was beautiful, 3 stories of renovated perfection with original moldings and modern fixtures, the kind of place that appears in Brooklyn real estate magazines. Every time I visited, I felt small and shabby, like I was tracking dirt onto their pristine floors just by existing. Sarah barely looked up from her phone. She was sitting on their leather couch, the kind that costs thousands of dollars, wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, but it was the kind of messy that rich women achieve with expensive products and styling techniques. She glanced at me when I came in, said, "Hi, Mom," in that distracted way that meant she wasn't really seeing me at all, and went back to scrolling. Her husband Mark was in the kitchen, wearing an expensive watch I'd never seen before, the kind that catches light and screams money. He was making himself an espresso with their fancy machine, the kind with all the bells and whistles that I'd seen in coffee shop windows. The machine hissed and gurgled, and he didn't turn around when I entered. Didn't acknowledge my presence until I was standing right there, awkwardly holding my gift bag like a child waiting for attention. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and something else. Something expensive and unfamiliar. They'd recently renovated, adding a wine fridge and a second oven, sub-zero appliances that I knew cost more than a car. Everything gleamed, stainless steel and white quartz, without a single smudge or fingerprint. My own kitchen, with its ancient gas stove and chipped laminate counters, felt worlds away from this sterile perfection. He glanced at the bag in my hand with something like contempt, his eyes moving from the crumpled tissue paper to my worn coat to my face, assessing and dismissing in one swift look. When I pulled out the tea and explained what it was for, trying to sound enthusiastic and helpful rather than desperate for approval, his lip curled. "It's supposed to help with inflammation and energy," I said, my voice coming out too loud in the quiet kitchen, too eager. "The woman at the store said it has turmeric and ginger and—" That's when he said it. "Only pigs drink that." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. I felt them hit me physically, like a punch to the stomach. My hand started trembling, the package of tea rustling in my grip. I looked at Sarah, waiting for her to defend me, to tell him that was inappropriate, that he couldn't speak to her mother that way. She laughed. Not the nervous laugh of someone uncomfortable, not a laugh that said, "Mark, that's too far," but a real laugh, like she agreed. Her head tilted back, her perfect white teeth showing, and she laughed like he'd said something genuinely funny. Like comparing her mother to a pig was just another joke they shared. Another way for them to bond over their superiority. I felt my chest tighten. The gift bag slipped from my fingers, landing on their pristine floor with a soft thud. The tissue paper spilled out, wrinkled and cheap-looking against their expensive tile. Nobody picked it up. Nobody moved. Mark took a sip of his espresso, his eyes on his phone. Sarah had already returned her attention to her screen, and I stood there, invisible and humiliated, feeling like I might suffocate on my own shame. I have given everything to this family, every ounce of strength I possessed, every dollar I could scrape together. When Sarah was 7 and wanted piano lessons, I worked double shifts at the diner on Flatbush Avenue, my feet swelling in my shoes until I could barely walk home. I remember those nights so clearly. I'd start at 6 in the morning, the diner just opening, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the air. I'd work through the breakfast rush, through lunch, take a 2-hour break where I'd sit in the back alley with my shoes off, my feet propped up on a milk crate, trying not to cry from the pain. Then I'd go back for the dinner shift, sometimes working until midnight or later if someone needed coverage. The owner, a Greek man named Dimitri, felt sorry for me. He'd slip me extra tips when he could, let me take home leftover pastries for Sarah. I'd get home after she was asleep, exhausted beyond words, and I'd go into her room and watch her breathe, this small, perfect person I'd made. And I'd think about the piano lessons she'd begged for. She'd seen a girl at school who played, had come home with stars in her eyes talking about how beautiful the music was, how she wanted to learn. And I'd said yes because I couldn't bear to disappoint her, couldn't bear to be the mother who had to say no to her daughter's dreams. Those piano lessons cost $75 a week. $75 that meant I wore shoes with holes in them for another year. $75 that meant I ate oatmeal for dinner more nights than not. But when I picked her up from her lessons, and she'd chatter excitedly about what she'd learned, playing scales on my arm with her small fingers, it felt worth it. Everything felt worth it if it made her happy. I remember carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs in the summer heat, bags cutting into my palms, just so she could have fresh fruit every day. The elevator in our building has been broken more than it's worked over the years. On the worst days, in August when the heat makes the stairwell feel like an oven, I'd have to stop on each landing, my heart hammering, sweat running down my back, the plastic bags leaving deep red grooves in my hands. But I'd haul up those groceries, the good organic fruit from the farmer's market that cost twice as much as the regular store, because Sarah's teacher had sent home a note about the importance of nutrition for growing children. When her father left us, when she was only 12, I held her while she cried and promised her that everything would be okay, even though I was drowning in bills and fear. He'd left in April, right after tax season, and I remember finding out there was no refund coming, that he'd emptied our savings account before he went. He'd been having an affair with a woman from his office, someone younger and prettier and without the weight of a 12-year-old daughter in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. Sarah cried for weeks. She'd wake up in the night calling for him, and I'd go to her room and hold her, my own tears falling into her hair. I'd tell her stories to distract her, sing her the lullabies I used to sing when she was a baby. I'd promise her that we'd be fine, that we didn't need him, that we had each other and that was enough. But the bills kept coming. The rent, the utilities, the piano lessons I couldn't bring myself to cancel because she'd already lost her father. And I couldn't take music away from her too. I took on extra work, cleaning houses on the weekends. I'd scrub other people's toilets, get on my hands and knees to clean their floors, dust their expensive furniture and water their plants. I'd come home smelling like cleaning products, my hands raw from chemicals, and I'd scrub myself in the shower until my skin was red, trying to feel clean again, trying to feel like more than just a woman who cleaned up other people's messes. I paid for her college every semester, taking out loans I'm still repaying even now at 64 years old. Sarah had wanted to go to NYU, a private university with tuition that made my head spin. The guidance counselor had suggested state schools, said they were more realistic for our financial situation. But Sarah had her heart set on NYU, on living in Manhattan, on being part of that world of coffee shops and culture and opportunity. I'd sat with the financial aid forms for hours, filling them out with shaking hands, seeing the numbers add up to something impossible. The tuition alone was over $50,000 a year. Even with some scholarships and grants, we'd need loans. Lots of loans. The woman at the bank had looked at me sympathetically and asked if I was sure, if we'd considered other options. I'd signed the papers anyway. 4 years of papers, of watching that debt climb higher and higher, knowing I'd be paying for it long into my retirement. But I told myself it was worth it. Sarah was getting an education, making something of herself. She'd graduate and get a good job and be proud of what she'd accomplished. Maybe she'd remember how hard I'd worked to make it possible. Maybe she'd look back someday and understand the sacrifice. I gave her the down payment for her wedding, $20,000 I'd been saving for my own retirement. Money I'd earned cleaning houses on weekends when the diner wasn't enough. I'd been putting away a little bit each month for years, hiding it in a separate account that her father hadn't known about before he left. It was supposed to be my safety net, my cushion for old age, for when my body finally gave out and I couldn't work anymore. But when Sarah got engaged to Mark, when she came to me with wedding magazines and excited plans, I couldn't say no. She wanted a big wedding, something beautiful and memorable. Mark's family was wealthy. They were hosting the rehearsal dinner at an expensive restaurant in Manhattan, and Sarah felt pressure to match their contributions. She'd come to my apartment one evening, sat on my old couch and said, "Mom, I need help. Mark's parents are paying for so much, and I want to contribute too, but I don't have anything saved." She'd looked at me with those eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me when she was 7 and wanted piano lessons, when she was 12 and her father left, when she was 18 and dreaming of NYU. And I'd heard myself saying, I have some money saved. You can have it for the wedding. The relief on her face had made it feel worth it in that moment. She'd hugged me, really hugged me, for the first time in months. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I'll pay you back, I promise. I'd believed her. Or maybe I'd wanted to believe her so badly that I'd convinced myself it was true. I remember her wedding day, how beautiful she looked in that white dress I'd helped her choose. We'd gone to 3 different bridal shops, spent hours in fitting rooms while she tried on dress after dress. I'd sat in those plush chairs they provide for family members, drinking champagne I didn't want because they kept refilling my glass, watching my daughter transform into a bride. The dress she chose cost $8,000. $8,000 for something she'd wear for one day. But she'd looked like a princess in it, like every bride should look. And I'd said yes before I even asked if there was something less expensive. She'd asked me to help with the flowers, the seating arrangements, 1,000 little details. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, my apartment became wedding central. I had seating charts spread across my kitchen table, vendor contracts and menu options and color swatches covering every surface. I coordinated with the florist, the caterer, the DJ, the photographer. I became the unpaid wedding planner, making calls during my lunch breaks, sending emails late at night after work. I stayed up until 3 a.m. the night before, hand-folding napkins into swans because she'd seen it in a magazine and thought it was elegant. My fingers cramped, but I didn't stop. I folded 200 napkins, each one taking several minutes to get the shape just right. My back ached from bending over the table, my eyes burned from exhaustion, but I kept going because Sarah wanted swans, and I wanted to give her swans. At the reception, she barely spoke to me. She was too busy with Mark's family, his mother in her pearls and designer suit, his father talking loudly about his stock portfolio and investment properties. They owned a house in Connecticut, a condo in Florida, had memberships at country clubs and vacation homes I'd only seen in magazines. They moved through the wedding like visiting royalty, graciously accepting congratulations, posing for endless photographs. I sat at a table near the back with my sister Ruth and a few cousins I barely knew. Ruth had squeezed my hand and whispered, "At least she looks happy," trying to make me feel better. But I'd watched Sarah circulate through the room, stopping at every table to chat and laugh, skipping right past ours without even a glance. I'd watched her dance with Mark's father, seen her throw her head back laughing at something Mark's brother said, witnessed her hugging Mark's mother like they were best friends. When they cut the cake, a 5-tier monstrosity covered in fondant flowers that had cost $3,000, Sarah didn't save me a piece. I watched her feed cake to Mark, watched them kiss while people cheered, watched her cut slices for Mark's parents and grandparents. The catering staff came around with plates for everyone else, but somehow I ended up without one. I was too embarrassed to ask, so I sat there smiling like it didn't matter, like I wasn't the mother of the bride sitting at a table in the back without even a taste of my daughter's wedding cake. I told myself she was just caught up in the excitement, that it didn't mean anything. But even then, in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that maybe I was already becoming invisible to her. Maybe I'd always been invisible, just the person who made things happen in the background, the one who paid for things and solved problems and then quietly disappeared. The years after her marriage were a slow erosion of my place in her life. She called less frequently, and when she did, it was always to ask for something. The conversations became transactional, devoid of real connection. "Mom, can you watch the apartment while we're in the Hamptons?" "Mom, we need help with the mortgage this month." "Mom, Mark's car broke down and we're a little short." I always said yes. I wired money from my checking account, watched it dwindle with each transfer. First 1,000 here for a car repair, then 2,000 for property taxes, then 5,000 for a medical bill that their insurance didn't cover, though I later saw Mark wearing a new Rolex the next time I visited. I told myself this was what mothers did, that family came first. I told myself that helping them was an investment in our relationship, that they'd remember my generosity and it would bring us closer. But the visits became shorter, the conversations more strained. She'd glance at her phone while I talked, her attention always somewhere else. Her eyes would glaze over when I told her about my life, about the painting class I'd started, about my neighbor Lily, about the small joys I'd found in my daily routine. She'd nod absently and say, "Mm-hmm," while scrolling through Instagram, not really listening at all. Mark barely acknowledged my presence. When I came to their house, I felt like an intruder in my own daughter's life. He'd greet me with a curt nod if he greeted me at all, usually just grunting in my general direction before returning to his phone or his computer or whatever was more important than his wife's mother. He'd leave the room when I started talking, make pointed comments about how crowded the house felt with extra people, check his watch repeatedly as if timing how long until I'd leave. I remember one visit where I'd brought over homemade lasagna, Sarah's favorite from when she was growing up. I'd spent hours making it, layering the noodles and cheese and meat sauce just right, the way I'd made it for her birthday dinners when she was young. When I arrived, Mark took one look at it and said, "We're trying to eat clean right now," and put it straight into the refrigerator. They ordered sushi instead, expensive rolls from some trendy place that delivered, and didn't offer to share any with me. I sat at their table eating a small bowl of salad while they enjoyed their meal, my lasagna growing cold in the fridge, a physical manifestation of how unwanted my offerings had become. Last Christmas, they didn't invite me to dinner. I waited by the phone all morning, thinking maybe they'd forgotten to call, but by evening I understood the truth. They'd celebrated without me. I spent that night alone, eating leftover turkey sandwich and watching old movies, trying not to cry. The apartment felt especially empty that night. I'd put up a small tree by the window, nothing fancy, just a 3-foot artificial one I'd bought at a discount store years ago. I'd hung some lights and a few ornaments, including the ones Sarah had made in elementary school, construction paper and glitter and her handprint preserved in clay. I'd arranged them carefully, trying to create some sense of holiday cheer, but they just made the place feel sadder, like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I'd made a full Christmas dinner out of habit, even though it was just me. Turkey breast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the cranberry sauce Sarah used to love. I set the table with my nice dishes, the ones I save for special occasions, and I even lit candles. But sitting there alone, looking at the empty chair across from me, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I made a sandwich with the turkey and ate it standing at the counter, then packed the rest away in containers that I knew would eventually go bad in the back of my refrigerator because I wouldn't be able to finish them alone. On New Year's Eve, I saw photos on Sarah's social media of their celebration with Mark's family. Everyone dressed beautifully, champagne glasses raised, a table full of expensive food. I wasn't in a single picture. I commented with a heart emoji, something cheerful and supportive, and she never responded. Not a like, not a reply, nothing. My comment just sat there under her post, a small, desperate attempt at connection that everyone could see had been ignored. I spent New Year's alone too, watching the ball drop on TV with a cup of tea, thinking about how I'd imagined my life would be at this age. I'd thought I'd be surrounded by family, maybe even grandchildren by now. I'd thought Sarah and I would have the kind of relationship my mother and I never had, close and warm and full of laughter. Instead, I was alone on New Year's Eve, sending ignored heart emojis to my daughter's Instagram posts, wondering where I'd gone wrong. But I kept trying. I kept showing up, kept offering help, kept believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, things would change. I ignored the small cruelties, the way Mark spoke to me like I was a servant, the way Sarah's eyes went cold when I suggested we spend time together. There was the time I offered to help them paint their bathroom, and Mark said, "I don't know, you might mess it up." The time Sarah forgot my birthday but called 2 days later, asking if I could loan them money for a weekend trip to Vermont. The time I showed up to a lunch Sarah had invited me to, only to discover she'd forgotten and made other plans, leaving me standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant feeling foolish and dismissed. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was imagining things, but deep down I knew. I knew I was being used. I knew that I'd become nothing more than a checkbook to them, an ATM they could withdraw from whenever they needed, someone whose feelings didn't matter as long as the money kept coming. The Detox tea incident was different. It wasn't just another small slight I could swallow and forget. It was the way he said it, the disgust in his voice, and the way Sarah didn't defend me. I stood in their kitchen, my face burning with shame, and something inside me fractured. I felt it happen, like ice cracking on a pond. A physical sensation in my chest, something breaking that had been holding on for too long. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. My hands went numb. I bent down and picked up the gift bag from the floor, my hands shaking so badly the tissue paper rustled loudly in the quiet kitchen, and walked out without saying goodbye. I walked through their perfect house, past the photos on the walls of Sarah and Mark at various vacation destinations I'd never been invited to, past the expensive furniture and the artwork I'd never be cultured enough to understand. I walked out their front door and down their pristine steps and onto their tree-lined street where everyone had money and happiness and families who actually wanted them. Neither of them followed me. Neither of them called. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, half expecting to hear the door open behind me, to hear Sarah's voice calling, "Mom, wait," ready to explain that it was just a joke, that Mark didn't mean it, that of course I was welcome to stay. But there was only silence. The door stayed closed. The brownstone stood there, beautiful and cold, and I was on the outside of it, where I'd always been. I took the subway home, the train crowded with Sunday afternoon passengers, families returning from outings, young couples laughing, groups of friends chatting in Spanish and Russian and languages I couldn't identify. A young couple sat across from me, laughing and holding hands, and I felt such a deep ache of loneliness I had to look away. She was leaning into him, whispering something that made him smile, and he kissed her forehead with such easy affection that I wanted to scream. When I got back to my apartment, I made tea. The same brand I'd bought for Sarah, and sat by the window watching the light fade. The tea tasted bitter. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be enough, trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I thought about my savings account, how little was left after all the loans and gifts and emergency payments. I thought about the basement storage unit where I kept boxes of Sarah's childhood things, photo albums and school projects and baby clothes I'd saved, thinking maybe one day she'd want them for her own children. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to sirens and car horns and the couple upstairs arguing. Their voices carried through the thin walls. A man and woman shouting about money, about trust, about betrayal. Their fight mirrored something inside me, something I'd been refusing to acknowledge. Around 3 a.m, I got up and opened my laptop. I checked my bank statements, something I'd been avoiding for months. The numbers were worse than I'd thought. My retirement fund was nearly empty. The small amount of Bitcoin I'd invested in years ago, hoping it might grow into something substantial, had lost value. I'd loaned Sarah and Mark almost $40,000 over the past 3 years. Not once had they paid any of it back. Not once had they even mentioned it. Seeing it all laid out in numbers made it real in a way it hadn't been before. $40,000. I thought about what that represented. Years of saving, of doing without, of choosing my daughter's comfort over my own needs. $40,000 that could have been a comfortable retirement, travel, security in my old age. Instead, it had bought me nothing but contempt and a comparison to a pig. I opened my email and started scrolling through old messages, not looking for anything in particular, just unable to sleep, unable to stop the spiral of thoughts in my mind. That's when I found them. Dozens of emails between Sarah and Mark, accidentally sent to me instead of each other because of some autofill mistake. My cursor hovered over the first one. Part of me knew I shouldn't read them, that this would hurt more than I could handle, but I clicked anyway. I read them with growing horror, my stomach twisting with each sentence. They were discussing me, planning how to ask for more money, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. Mark had written, "Your mom is such a pushover. Just tell her we need it for something important and she'll wire it over. Maybe we can get enough for that Hamptons house rental this summer." Sarah had responded, "I know, she's so desperate to stay involved in our lives. It's actually kind of pathetic. I just have to mention we're struggling and she falls all over herself to help." Mark, "Does she really think we can't afford our mortgage? We make 3 times what she makes." Sarah, "She doesn't even ask questions anymore. Last month I told her we needed $3,000 for car repairs, and we used it for that wine country trip. She has no idea." Mark, "At this rate, we'll have the down payment for the investment property by fall. All thanks to your generous mother." Sarah, "Stop. You're making me feel guilty. But seriously, she makes it so easy. And it's not like she's spending it on anything. She just sits in that depressing apartment anyway." There were more. So many more. Months of emails, planning and scheming, laughing at my expense. References to my pathetic attempts to stay relevant in their lives. Jokes about my cheap clothes and small apartment. Comments about how I was clingy and needy and didn't know when to take a hint. The words blurred on the screen. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely move the mouse. I got up and walked to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, I looked old, tired, used up. The bathroom light was harsh and unflattering, showing every line, every age spot, every sign of a life spent working too hard and sleeping too little. I thought about confronting them, but what would I say? How do you confront someone who sees you as nothing more than a resource to be exploited? What words could possibly make them understand the depth of their cruelty? They knew what they were doing. Those emails made that clear. This wasn't thoughtlessness or selfishness. This was calculated manipulation. This was my daughter and her husband actively plotting to take advantage of me, laughing about it, feeling no remorse. I went back to the kitchen and made more tea, my hands trembling so badly I spilled water on the counter. The teacup slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor, porcelain scattering across the tiles. I stood there staring at the broken pieces, and something in me broke too. I sank down onto the floor, my back against the cabinet, and I cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place so raw I didn't know it existed. I cried for all the birthdays they'd forgotten, all the holidays I'd spent alone, all the times I'd been sick and no one came to check on me. I cried for the woman I used to be, strong and proud, before I'd let myself become this small, desperate thing, begging for scraps of affection from people who didn't even respect me. I cried for the piano lessons and the college tuition and the wedding down payment. I cried for the double shifts at the diner and the houses I'd cleaned and the shoes with holes in them I'd worn so Sarah could have better. I cried for every sacrifice that had been taken for granted, every kindness that had been repaid with cruelty, every time I'd chosen her over myself and received nothing but contempt in return. My neighbor Lily heard me through the wall. She knocked softly on my door, calling my name with concern in her voice. I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. I just sat there on my kitchen floor surrounded by broken porcelain, broken promises, broken trust, crying like something vital had been ripped out of my chest. But in that moment, on my kitchen floor surrounded by broken porcelain, I felt something else too. Anger. Real, burning anger. It started as a small ember in my chest, growing hotter with each breath, until it burned away the grief and left something harder in its place. I was tired of being used, tired of being dismissed, tired of buying love that should have been mine by right. For the first time in years, I thought about saying no. Just no. No more money. No more desperate attempts to stay relevant in their lives. No more accepting cruelty and calling it family. The word felt powerful in my mind, a declaration of war against all the years of submission and sacrifice. I cleaned up the broken teacup and went back to bed as dawn was breaking. I didn't sleep, but I felt something shifting inside me, like a door I'd kept locked for years was finally starting to open. The anger had settled into something else, something clearer and colder. Determination. Resolve. A recognition that things couldn't continue as they had been, that I deserved better than this, that maybe it was time to choose myself for once. The next morning I called my sister Ruth. She lives in Queens and we don't talk as often as we should, but she's always been honest with me, sometimes brutally so. I told her everything, the emails, the money, the tea incident. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said, "Margaret, you need to stop. You need to stop giving them everything and getting nothing back. You're killing yourself trying to earn something they should be giving you freely." Her words hit me like cold water, shocking and clarifying. "But she's my daughter," I said, my voice small. "And you're her mother. That should mean something. That should mean she treats you with respect and love, not like a piggy bank she can break open whenever she feels like it." "I don't know how to stop," I admitted. "What if she never speaks to me again?" "What if she doesn't?" Ruth said, not unkindly. "Is what you have now really a relationship? When did she last call just to see how you were doing? When did she last show any interest in your life?" I couldn't answer because the truth was too painful. Months. It had been months since Sarah had called without wanting something. Maybe longer. "You can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm," Ruth continued. "Even if that someone is your own child. Especially if they don't even appreciate the sacrifice." We talked for over an hour, Ruth sharing her own experiences with her kids, the boundaries she'd had to set, the tough love she'd had to give. By the time we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Support. Someone was on my side. Someone saw what I'd been too close to see. Her words hit me like cold water. I knew she was right. But knowing and doing are two different things. How do you stop loving someone? How do you stop hoping they'll change? But I was so tired. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of the constant ache of rejection. That afternoon, I went for a walk in Prospect Park. It was a beautiful day, early spring, with crocuses pushing up through the grass. I sat on a bench near the lake and watched families with their children, elderly couples walking hand in hand. The park was alive with life. Joggers passed by in bright athletic wear, their feet pounding rhythmic patterns on the paved path. A man threw a frisbee for his dog, a golden retriever that leaped and caught it midair with athletic grace. Children played on the grass nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze that smelled of fresh earth and new growth. I watched a father swing his young daughter around in circles, her squeals of delight piercing and joyful, her pink jacket a blur of color against the green backdrop. I remembered when Sarah was that age, maybe 4 or 5, when she'd begged me to spin her around in our tiny living room until we were both dizzy and laughing, collapsing on the couch in a giggling heap. She'd look up at me with such pure adoration, such uncomplicated love, and I'd think I was the luckiest mother in the world. Where had that little girl gone? When had she stopped looking at me like I hung the moon? I thought about my life, about the fortune I'd accumulated over the years through careful saving and wise investments in stocks, money I'd been planning to leave to Sarah. I thought about the small amount of wealth I'd managed to build despite everything, assets I'd never touched because I was always trying to help everyone else. What was it all for if I couldn't even enjoy it? If I couldn't even demand basic respect? An old woman sat down next to me on the bench. She had white hair and kind eyes, and she smiled at me. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" she said. I nodded, and somehow, maybe because she was a stranger, I found myself telling her about Sarah and Mark. The words poured out of me. The whole sorry story, from the piano lessons to the tea incident. She listened, really listened. Her eyes never leaving my face, her expression compassionate but not pitying. When I finished, she patted my hand. Her skin was thin and papery, spotted with age, but her grip was strong. "Sweetheart," she said, "at some point you have to decide what you're worth, and nobody can make that decision for you." "But she's my daughter," I said, the same protest I'd given Ruth. "That doesn't give her the right to treat you like garbage. My daughter and I didn't speak for 3 years because she thought she could use me and abuse me. 3 years. Hardest thing I ever did. But you know what? When we finally reconciled, it was on my terms. She learned to respect me. And now we have a real relationship, not one based on her taking and me giving until there's nothing left." 3 years, I whispered. The thought terrified me. It doesn't have to be that long, but you have to be willing to walk away if that's what it takes. You have to value yourself enough to demand respect. She stood up, touched my shoulder gently, and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the smell of spring grass and the sound of distant laughter. I went home and stood in front of my mirror for a long time. I looked at my face, the lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair. The sadness I'd been carrying for so long it had become part of my expression. I thought about that stranger's words. What was I worth? What did I deserve? The answer came quietly but clearly. I deserved respect. I deserved kindness. I deserved to be treated like I mattered, not because of what I could give or provide or sacrifice, but simply because I was a human being, a mother who had loved her child with everything she had. That should have been enough. The fact that it wasn't said something about Sarah, not about me. That night, Sarah called. She needed money again. Her voice was casual, almost bored. Mark's car needed repairs and they were short this month. Could I help out? Just a few thousand. I opened my mouth to say yes, the word so automatic after all these years. But something stopped me. I thought about those emails. I thought about the tea. I thought about Christmas alone. And I said, no. There was silence on the other end. "What?" Sarah said, like she'd misheard me. "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "I can't keep doing this, Sarah." She laughed, but it was a nervous laugh this time. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. We really need this." "I need it too," I said. "I need to stop giving away everything I have to people who don't appreciate it." Her voice turned cold. "That's not fair. We've always been grateful." "Have you?" I asked. "When was the last time you thanked me? When was the last time you called me just to talk, not to ask for something?" She didn't answer. The silence stretched out between us, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, she said, "I can't believe you're being like this," and hung up. I stood there holding the phone, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd actually said no. And the world hadn't ended. I wasn't struck by lightning. I was still standing, still breathing. I felt terrified and liberated at the same time, like I'd jumped off a cliff and discovered I could fly. The next few days were difficult. Sarah texted me several times, each message more accusatory than the last. I was being selfish. I was abandoning them when they needed me most. How could I do this to my own daughter? Mark sent me an email calling me ungrateful, which was so absurd it almost made me laugh. One text read, "I can't believe you're choosing money over family." Another, "You were never there for me growing up and now you're abandoning me again." That one hurt, because it was so unfair, such a complete revision of history. I'd been there for every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that mattered. I'd worked myself to exhaustion to be there for her, but she'd rewritten our entire history to cast herself as the victim and me as the neglectful mother. My neighbor Lily, who lived across the hall and had always been kind to me, noticed I seemed upset. She invited me in for coffee one morning, and I found myself telling her everything. She didn't judge me. She just listened, nodded, and said, "Good for you. It's about time you stood up for yourself." Her apartment was so different from mine, filled with plants and photographs and bright colors. She'd made it a home, not just a place to exist. We sat at her kitchen table, sunlight streaming through clean windows, and she told me about her own children, the boundaries she'd had to set over the years. "They'll come around or they won't," she said, "but either way, you'll know you didn't let them destroy you. You'll know you valued yourself enough to demand better." That night, I slept better than I had in years. Really slept, deeply and peacefully, without the usual anxiety and guilt churning in my stomach. When I woke up, the morning light seemed brighter somehow. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood wake up, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was like. Peace. Over the next week, I took concrete steps to protect myself. I went to the bank and moved my savings into a new account, one Sarah didn't have access to. The banker, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, helped me set everything up. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, and I found myself giving her a brief explanation. She nodded knowingly. "You'd be surprised how often I see this. Good for you for protecting yourself." I met with a financial advisor and looked at my assets properly for the first time in years. I had more money than I'd thought, even after all the loans and gifts. My investments in the stock market had performed well. Even my small venture into cryptocurrency had started to recover, the Bitcoin worth more now than when I'd bought it. I had enough to be comfortable, to maybe even enjoy my retirement if I stopped giving it all away. The advisor, a man in his 50s named Robert, walked me through everything. He showed me projections, what my retirement could look like if I was careful. "You've actually done very well," he said. "You've made some smart investments over the years, but these large withdrawals..." He gestured to the pattern of money leaving my accounts. "They're going to hurt you in the long run. If you keep this up, you'll have nothing left in 5 years. 5 years. That's all I had left if I'd continued down the same path. 5 years until I'd have given everything away and had nothing left for myself. The realization was sobering and motivating at once. I also went to see a therapist, something I'd always thought was for other people with real problems. But Dr. Chen, a woman about my age with a calm, steady presence, helped me understand that my problems were real, that I'd been in an emotionally abusive relationship with my own daughter, that it was okay to set boundaries, that saying no wasn't selfish, it was necessary. My sessions with Dr. Chen became a lifeline. Her office was in a building on 7th Avenue, small and cozy with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. The first time I went, I almost turned around and left. I felt foolish, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I forced myself to walk in, to sit in that chair, to start talking. She helped me see patterns I'd been blind to for years. How I'd equated love with sacrifice. How I'd accepted crumbs of affection and called it a relationship. How I'd let fear of abandonment keep me locked in a cycle of giving and receiving nothing. "You've been in survival mode for so long," she said during one session, "trying to earn love from your daughter the same way you probably tried to earn it from your own mother. But love isn't something you should have to earn. It should be freely given, especially between parent and child." We talked about my childhood, my own mother who'd been cold and withholding, and how I'd promised myself I'd be different with Sarah. But in trying so hard not to be my mother, I'd lost myself entirely. I'd gone so far in the opposite direction that I'd become a doormat, someone with no boundaries, no sense of self-worth beyond what I could provide for others. You can be loving without being a martyr, Dr. Chen said. You can be generous without being taken advantage of. It's not about withholding love, it's about requiring respect. 3 weeks after I said no, Sarah showed up at my apartment. I heard her knock and my stomach clenched with anxiety, old habits of fear and guilt rising up. But I took a deep breath and opened the door. She looked angry, her face tight and red. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room. Mark was waiting downstairs in the car. She'd brought him as backup, I realized, to help pressure me. But I didn't let her take control of the conversation. I sat down calmly and waited for her to start. She launched into a speech about how I was ruining their lives, how they were struggling financially and I was being cruel and heartless. She brought up everything I'd ever done wrong as a mother, every time I'd been too strict or too lenient, every mistake I'd made raising her alone. She weaponized my love for her, turned it into a tool to make me feel guilty. "You worked all the time when I was growing up," she said. "I barely saw you. And now, when I actually need you, you turn your back on me. I worked all the time so you could have piano lessons and new clothes and a college education," I said quietly. "That was your choice. I didn't ask you to work yourself to death. You asked for the piano lessons. You asked to go to NYU. I was a kid. You should have said no if you couldn't afford it." The unfairness of it took my breath away. I'd sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, and now she was using those sacrifices as evidence of my failings as a mother. I listened without interrupting, and when she finally ran out of steam, I said quietly, "I love you, Sarah. I always have, but I won't let you treat me like this anymore." She stared at me, stunned. Her mouth opened and closed. Finally, she said, "You're being selfish. You're choosing money over your own daughter." "I'm choosing myself," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself. And if you can't understand that, if you can't treat me with basic respect, then maybe we need some distance." "Basic respect?" Her voice rose. "I respect you. I've always respected you. You laughed when Mark compared me to a pig. That was just a joke. It wasn't funny. You're too sensitive. You always have been. And you're cruel," I said. "You and Mark have been using me for years, and I let you because I was afraid of losing you. But I've realized that I can't lose something I never really had." She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Fine," she said, "if that's how you want it." And she walked out, slamming the door behind her. I sat there alone in the silence, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to run after her, to apologize, to take it all back. But I didn't. I stayed where I was, breathing slowly, letting the anxiety wash over me and recede. I'd done it. I'd stood up for myself, and I'd survived. The following weeks were strange. Sarah didn't call or text. Neither did Mark. I felt their absence like a physical ache, but I also felt something else. Relief. The constant tension was gone. The waiting for the phone to ring with another request. The anxiety about disappointing them. It was all gone, replaced by a quiet calm I hadn't known was possible. Lily became a real friend during this time. We started having coffee together every morning, sitting in her apartment with its plants and bright curtains, talking about everything and nothing. She was 72, a widow, and she'd been through her own battles with her children. She understood what I was going through in a way nobody else could. She didn't try to fix me or give me advice. She just sat with me, listened to me, reminded me I wasn't alone. I also started doing things for myself. Small things at first. I bought new clothes, nothing expensive, just things that made me feel good. A soft purple sweater that reminded me of lavender fields I'd seen in a magazine. New jeans that actually fit properly. A pair of comfortable but stylish boots that didn't leak when it rained. I got my hair cut and colored at a salon instead of doing it myself in my bathroom. The stylist, a young man with bright tattoos and a warm smile, asked me what I wanted, and I said, "Something that makes me feel like myself again." He gave me layers and highlights, took 10 years off my appearance. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked alive again. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center on Union Street. I'd always loved art, but had never made time for it, always putting everyone else's needs first. Now, every Thursday evening, I sat in that bright room with other women my age, mixing colors and trying to capture the world on paper. I wasn't very good, but I didn't care. It made me happy. One Saturday, Lily convinced me to go with her to a matinee at BAM. We saw an old Katharine Hepburn film, and afterward we went to a diner and talked for hours about movies and books and life. I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to just enjoy myself, to spend time with someone who wanted nothing from me except my company. My apartment started to change too. I cleaned out old boxes, threw away things I'd been holding on to for no reason. I painted my bedroom a soft blue color I'd always loved. I bought new curtains for the living room, let more light in. The space felt brighter, airier, like I could breathe again. 2 months after our confrontation, Sarah called. Her voice was different, softer, almost contrite. She said she wanted to talk, that she'd been thinking about what I'd said. She asked if she could come over, alone this time, without Mark. I hesitated, but something in her tone made me agree. She arrived the next afternoon looking tired and smaller somehow, like some of the arrogance had been knocked out of her. We sat in my living room, both of us nervous. She started talking, and for the first time in years, I heard real emotion in her voice. She said she'd been thinking about our relationship, about how she'd treated me. She said Mark had been angry when I cut them off, that they'd had huge fights about money, fights that had forced her to look at their financial situation honestly for the first time. She'd discovered the extent of their debt, the way they'd been living beyond their means, propped up by my constant financial support. "I didn't realize how much we depended on you," she said. "Or maybe I did realize it and I just didn't care. Mark made it seem normal, like parents were supposed to help their kids financially. His parents still give them money all the time." "His parents are wealthy," I said. "And I suspect they don't give money at the expense of their own well-being." "No," she admitted. "They don't." I listened, hopeful but cautious. It sounded good, but I'd been down this road before. How many times had she apologized, promised to change, only to fall back into the same patterns? As if reading my mind, she said, "I know I've said sorry before and not meant it, but I really am sorry this time, Mom. I've been awful to you. Mark has been awful to you." And I let it happen because it was easier than standing up to him or admitting I was wrong. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I'm glad you're recognizing this," I said carefully. "But words aren't enough, Sarah. I need to see real change. I need to be treated with respect, not just when you need something from me, but all the time." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I understand. And I know I have a lot to prove. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm just asking for a chance to do better." We talked for over an hour, the longest real conversation we'd had in years. She told me about her marriage, about how controlling Mark had become, how isolated she'd felt. She said she'd started seeing a therapist too, that she was trying to work through her own issues. I listened with a mixture of sympathy and wariness. Part of me wanted to believe her, to fall back into the familiar role of supportive mother who fixed everything. But I'd learned my lesson. I could love her and still protect myself. I could hope for change without sacrificing my own well-being. When she left, she hugged me, and I let her. But I didn't make any promises. I didn't offer money or help or solutions. I just said, "Let's take this slowly and see what happens." After she left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the same detox tea I'd bought for her all those months ago. It didn't taste bitter anymore. It tasted earthy and clean, like renewal. But the real test came 2 weeks later. I was at home painting, working on a landscape of Prospect Park, trying to capture the way the light filtered through the trees by the lake. My phone rang. It was Sarah, and her voice was urgent, almost panicked. "Mom," she said, "we have a crisis. Mark's business is in trouble and we're going to lose the house. We need $50,000, and we need it now." My heart sank. Here it was, the real test of whether anything had actually changed. I put down my paintbrush and took a deep breath. "Sarah," I said, "I can't give you that money." There was silence on the other end. Then she said, her voice breaking, "Mom, we're going to lose everything." "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said, and I meant it. "But giving you money won't solve the real problems. It'll just postpone them. You and Mark need to figure this out yourselves." "How can you say that?" she cried. "You're my mother. You're supposed to help me." "I am helping you," I said. "I'm helping you learn to stand on your own feet. I'm helping you by not enabling this anymore." She started crying, and every instinct in me screamed to give in, to fix it, to make her pain go away. But I held firm. "I love you," I said, "but I won't do this anymore." She hung up on me. For a moment, I sat there feeling sick, wondering if I'd just destroyed what little progress we'd made. But then I thought about Dr. Chen's words. You can't save people from their own choices. You can only save yourself. That evening, Lily came over and we sat on my fire escape, something we'd started doing on nice evenings. I told her what had happened. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. "It doesn't always feel good, but it's right." Over the next few weeks, I didn't hear from Sarah. I saw on social media that they'd sold the house in Park Slope and moved to a smaller place in Bed-Stuy. Mark's watch was gone from his photos. They looked stressed, but they were managing. And I realized something important. They were capable of handling their own problems. They'd just never had to, because I'd always swooped in to save them. During this time, I threw myself into my new life with a fervor that surprised me. I took a weekend trip to the Catskills with Lily and 2 other women from our painting class. We stayed in a small bed and breakfast, hiked through autumn woods, painted landscapes, drank wine by the fireplace. I laughed more during that weekend than I had in the entire previous year. I felt young again, or maybe not young, but alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I also started managing my finances more actively. I met with my advisor regularly, learned about diversifying my portfolio, even made some smart investments that increased my net worth significantly. The money I'd been giving away to Sarah and Mark was now working for me, growing, creating security for my future. I opened a separate account for travel and started planning a trip to Italy, something I'd always dreamed of, but never allowed myself. One evening in late October, almost 6 months after the tea incident, there was a knock on my door. It was Sarah, but she looked different. Older, more grounded. She wasn't crying or demanding. She just asked if we could talk. I let her in and made tea. Real tea this time. Not the detox kind. Just good black tea with honey. She told me she and Mark were separated. That the financial crisis had forced them to confront a lot of problems in their marriage. Problems that had been there all along, but that money had masked. She'd moved into her own apartment in Flatbush, was working full-time for the first time in years. She looked tired, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Strength. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I just wanted you to know that you were right, about everything. I've been using you. I've been letting Mark use you, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you." I felt my eyes well up. "Thank you for saying that," I said. We talked for hours that night. Really talked. Like we hadn't since she was a teenager. She told me about her therapy, about the things she was learning about herself. She talked about her childhood, how she'd resented me sometimes for working so much, for not being like other mothers. and how she'd carried that resentment into adulthood without even realizing it. She apologized for the emails, for the cruel things she'd said, for taking me for granted. I apologized too, for not setting boundaries sooner, for trying to buy her love instead of demanding the respect I deserved. We both cried, but they were different tears, cleansing tears, the kind that wash away old wounds and make space for something new. From that night on, our relationship began to change. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt it on a foundation of honesty and respect. Sarah started calling me regularly, not to ask for money, but just to talk. She invited me to her new apartment, a tiny studio but clean and hers. We had dinner together, just the two of us, and it felt easy and natural, like rediscovering someone I'd lost. She never asked me for money again. When she had problems, she solved them herself or asked for advice, not cash. I watched her grow into someone I could be proud of, someone strong and independent. And I grew too, into someone who valued herself, who knew her worth, who understood that love without respect is just another word for exploitation. The final twist came in December, almost a year after that terrible Sunday morning. I was going through old files, organizing my documents, when I found a voice recording on my phone I'd forgotten about. It was from 2 years ago, a pocket dial from Sarah's phone during a conversation between her and Mark. I'd saved it, meaning to delete it later, but had forgotten. I almost deleted it then, but something made me listen. Their voices came through clearly. They were talking about me, planning how to get more money out of me for a down payment on a beach house. Mark was saying, "We need to make her think we're struggling, play up the bills, the stress. She'll cave like she always does." Sarah had laughed and said, "She's so desperate to be needed, it's almost too easy." I sat there listening to my daughter and her husband plot against me, and I felt something remarkable. Nothing. No pain, no anger, no surprise. Just a distant sadness for who I used to be, the woman who would have been destroyed by this. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd already done the hard work of letting go, of building a life that didn't revolve around their approval. This recording was just confirmation of what I'd already known and accepted. I deleted it and went back to packing for my trip to Italy. I was leaving in 2 weeks, a month-long journey through Tuscany and Rome with Lily and 2 other friends. My suitcase was already half-packed, sitting open on my bed like a promise of adventures to come. When I told Sarah about the trip at our next dinner, she was genuinely happy for me. "That's amazing, Mom," she said, her eyes bright. "You deserve this. Tell me everything about where you're going." We spent the evening looking at maps and guidebooks, planning my itinerary. It felt so normal, so healthy, this new version of us. The old Sarah would have been jealous or dismissive. This Sarah was supportive and interested. Real change, I'd learned, happened slowly and quietly, not in grand gestures, but in small moments of genuine connection. Italy was everything I'd dreamed of and more. I wandered through ancient streets where cobblestones had been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, ate fresh pasta that melted on my tongue, drank wine that tasted like sunshine and earth. I painted watercolors of Renaissance architecture, trying to capture the golden light that bathed everything in a warm glow. The colors were different here, richer somehow, more saturated. The ochres and terracottas of the buildings, the deep green of cypress trees, the brilliant blue of the Mediterranean sky. In Tuscany, we stayed in a small villa surrounded by vineyards. I woke each morning to the sound of church bells and birdsong, had breakfast on a terrace overlooking rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. I learned to make fresh pasta from an Italian grandmother named Rosa who spoke no English, but communicated perfectly through smiles and hand gestures. She showed me how to roll the dough, how to cut it just right, and when I finally got it perfect, she kissed both my cheeks and called me brava. In Florence, I stood in front of Michelangelo's David and wept, overwhelmed by the beauty of it, by the sheer humanity captured in marble, by the fact that I was there, that I'd given myself this gift. The statue towered above me, perfect and powerful. And I thought about how long it had taken Michelangelo to create it. How much patience and vision and belief in his own worth. In Venice, Lily and I got hopelessly lost in the winding streets and ended up laughing hysterically when we emerged at the same bridge we'd crossed an hour earlier. We rode in a gondola at sunset, the water reflecting pink and gold, and for once I didn't feel self-conscious about being a tourist, about being someone who was allowing herself to experience joy. In Rome, I threw a coin in the Trevi fountain and made a wish, not for Sarah to change, not for our relationship to heal, but simply for the courage to keep choosing myself. The fountain was magnificent, water cascading over Baroque sculptures, tourists crowding around with cameras and wishes of their own. I closed my eyes, felt the coin leave my hand, heard the splash as it joined thousands of others at the bottom of the pool, and I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, acceptance, hope for a future I was building for myself. Lily and I laughed until we cried, got lost in Venice, danced in a plaza in Florence while street musicians played. I felt free in a way I'd never experienced, not just free from Sarah and Mark's demands, but free from my own need to be needed, my own fear of being alone. One evening, sitting on a terrace overlooking the Roman Forum as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold, I thought about the past year, about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become, about the tea that had somehow been the catalyst for everything, those 4 words that had cut through years of denial. Only pigs drink that. How such a small cruelty had finally broken through my defenses and forced me to see the truth. I thought about my assets, my net worth, the fortune I'd built through years of careful investing and saving. Money I'd nearly given away to people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. That wealth was mine now, securing my future, funding my dreams, proof that I valued myself enough to protect what I'd worked so hard to build. The stocks, the savings, the Bitcoin that had finally paid off, all of it represented not just financial security, but self-respect. When I returned to Brooklyn in January, Sarah picked me up at JFK. She hugged me tight and said, "I missed you, Mom." We drove back to my apartment, and she helped me carry my bags upstairs. She stayed for dinner, leftover pasta I'd brought back in my suitcase, and we looked through my photos, me telling stories about everything I'd seen and done. As she was leaving, she turned at the door and said, "I'm really proud of you, you know, for everything you've done this past year, for standing up to me. I needed that, even if I didn't know it at the time." I hugged her, this complicated daughter of mine, and felt genuine love without the desperation, without the need to hold on too tight. She had her own life now, and I had mine, and somehow that made room for a real relationship to grow. That night I sat by my window with a glass of wine, looking out at the Brooklyn streets I'd called home for so long. My apartment was warm and cozy, decorated exactly how I liked it. My painting supplies sat in the corner, waiting for my next session. My suitcase, unpacked now, held souvenirs and memories of a trip I'd thought I'd never take. My bank account was healthy, growing, mine to use however I wanted. I thought about that morning a year ago when I'd heard those cruel words about the tea. How they'd shattered something in me, but also freed something. How the worst moment of my relationship with my daughter had become the beginning of something better, something honest and real. The journey had taught me that love should never cost you your dignity. That family doesn't give anyone the right to exploit or diminish you. That saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary. That you can't control how others treat you, but you can control whether you accept it. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them experience the consequences of their own choices. That you're never too old to start over, to reclaim your life, to choose yourself. I raised my glass to the window, to the city lights, to the woman I'd become. "Here's to new beginnings," I whispered. Here's to knowing my worth. Here's to never settling for crumbs again. The next morning, I woke up to sun streaming through my windows and a text from Lily inviting me to breakfast. I got dressed in one of my new outfits, the ones that made me feel like myself again, and headed out into the cold January morning with a smile on my face. My life wasn't perfect. Sarah and I still had work to do, trust to rebuild, boundaries to maintain. But it was mine. Finally, completely, joyfully mine. And that made all the difference. Have you ever lived or known someone who lived something like this? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it.